Hi everybody. I'm going to read a book to you today for Earth Day. Earth Day is this week, and it's a special day to think about how we have to take care of our world, our Earth. We should think about that every day, but Earth Day is a special day to think about it. We should think about only using what we need to use, not using too much stuff, and reusing whatever we can use, and recycling and putting things in the compost that can go in the compost and the recycling. And I know you kids are very, very good at that. But I'm going to read you a story about some creatures from another planet who were not good at that, and they ruined their Earth. So it's just a made-up story, but it could be real. It's called the Wump World. And this could be what happens if we don't take care of our planet. The Wump World was a small world, very much smaller than our world. There were no great oceans and lofty mountains, no giant forests or sandy deserts. The Wump World was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. Have you ever heard of Wumps? These are the Wumps. The Wumps were simple grass eaters, and they spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in crystal clear rivers and lakes, and at night they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased, with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have been worried if they had known that someone 1,000,000 miles away was watching their little world. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. They're not exactly monsters, they're more like spaceships. Let's see. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, doors flew open, and then ramps shot down to the ground. Down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out into the meadow. They were called the Pollutions, from the planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the Pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. So they ruined the place that they came from. They didn't take good care of it. They polluted it. They made everything dirty where they lived, and now they need a new home, a new planet. They were all prattling around with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution and world chief, across the meadow. At the top of the hill, the chief stopped for a look around. Finally, he said, "This looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things going." One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out into the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. "Wump, wump!" they cried, and in a wild-eyed panic, they went humpity-clumping off through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. Then down they tumbled head over heels through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. Oh no, they're getting rid of all the trees. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by giant scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump World was overrun with machines. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let-up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. I don't think they're making it better. Suddenly, great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall, tall office buildings. And above them all loomed 100-story skyscrapers. Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes, going in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caves, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and the mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. So they had things to eat, but they were very unhappy. They can't go out. They're scared of all that noise. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down in the caves. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too scared of all the roarings and loud screechings from above, and it was growing noisier day by day. There was more and more noise and more of everything. More buildings with more smokestacks. Look how dirty the air is getting. Look how dirty the water is getting. They're putting all the garbage in it. More freeways with more traffic shooting out, more and more clouds of exhaust, more trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon, the cities were so clouded by the factory smog and the fumes from the freeways that the pollutions could barely breathe. They went sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling, and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the World Chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once. "We can't breathe the air! We can't drink the water! We can't stand the noise! We've had enough!" "Achoo!" sneezed the chief. "I know just what you mean. Something must be done. I promise." With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. "Gentlemen," he said, "this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick, but first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job. Get going." "Righto, Chief," barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then, zwoosh, 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 they took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. Then finally, one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I've found a new world! A bigger and better world!" "Nice going!" cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport, and they gave their hero a rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world. All the pollutions had to be packed and ready to go the next day. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the Space Center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. The world chief gave the signal for blast-off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships took off, kazoom, up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and they were gone. At last, it was quiet. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, They wanted to take no chances, so they waited in their caves, with their ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long silence, they decided it was time to go and see. The biggest one crept up to the tunnel, and he found it was covered with a crust of cement at the top. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. One by one, the other Wumps waddled out onto a freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something was happening to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings, with walls and walls of windows, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or one tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. It's so dark. The Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. They had to find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings and more roads and more wreckage and more rumble. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and go back to their cave, when the biggest one let out a joyful Wump! Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wump wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out into the meadow. Pretty soon the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. After a long, long time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and the lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way back up through the rubble, and it became Wump World again. See you later. Bye-bye.